Before I start, I want to introduce the co-president of the Glencoe Historical Society, Patrick, who's sitting in the back there. And we'd just like to acknowledge. So my name is Ellen Schubart, obviously, and I want to thank you for coming. We're here today to talk about the Ravine Bluffs Cottage, which is owned by the Glencoe Historical Society and was moved to its current location in Ravine Bluffs Park 4 years ago. Because there are going to be several speakers, we're going to ask you to please keep your questions to the end. We'd be happy to stay forever and answer them, but just let us get through this. So our story begins in 1911 when Sherman and Elizabeth Booth commissioned architect Frank Lloyd Wright to design an estate for them on 15 acres of land that they owned in northwest Glencoe. This is the design that Wright came up with. Sherman and Elizabeth Booth knew Wright and his new exciting architectural style. Sherman was Booth's attorney. And he and Elizabeth also probably knew Wright socially, as they all ran in similar circles of society that at that point in time were pushing for what we can today call progressive reforms. Elizabeth in particular was working on getting rights for women to vote. As Wright was designing and supervising the building of the new estate with its garage and stables, a cottage was also designed and built in 1913. This is where the Booth family would live during construction. At the time, the family was Sherman, Elizabeth, their two sons who are shown here, Knox and Sherman III, and a nanny. The nanny took care of the kids a lot of the time when Elizabeth was down in Springfield. But in 1914, something changed. We have no documentation to be specific, but it is likely that Booth and or Wright suffered financial difficulties. As a result, Sherman and Elizabeth cut back on their hopes for a large estate, and Booth and Wright pivoted. I know that's a 20th century word in a 19th century story, but they pivoted and decided to build a smaller house, which is what you're looking at the moment, and instead create a subdivision on the land. The family continued to live in the cottage while the new smaller house was built. The garage and the stables for the estate, which had already been built, were incorporated into this house. The partners had hoped to build 25 homes in this subdivision. That's on the left, it's the ad for the subdivision. But only 5 were ultimately built. The subdivision, while a landmark in architecture, was financially a failure. Sherman Booth ran this ad in the Tribune for 2 years, trying to sell the houses that had been built. When the Booth family finally took possession of their new house in 1916, the cottage was moved to 239 Franklin Road, where it stayed for over 100 years. During those years, 2 additional bedrooms and a front entrance were added. The house was expanded from its original 882 square feet to 1,700 square feet. In 2019, we've traveled a good deal now, developers purchased the home when the longtime owner died. Preservationists, including many in the Historical Society, had expressed concern over the future of the cottage when it went on sale, but the new owner said they were planning to keep the house. 1 week after purchasing the cottage, the owners pulled a demolition permit, despite the fact that in 1995, the cottage had received Glencoe honorary landmark status. This is the house at 239 Franklin. Peggy's going to tell you the rest of the story.
I get the really exciting part. At that point, many organizations led by GHS swung into action. The Frank Lloyd Wright Conservancy, a national organization based in Chicago, the Glencoe Park District, and the village of Glencoe all had officials interested in keeping the Wright-designed cottage from being destroyed. Lengthy, complicated, and difficult negotiations occurred, many during the holiday season of 2020. The honorary landmark status extended the normal timeline for demolition to 180 days, a deadline which was a constant concern. An emergency grant from the Tawani Foundation was approved only days before the deadline. These are quotes from architectural critics about the importance of the Booth Cottage. You can see that it was put on the endangered list. The whole world was aware of this, and there was a lot of international communication. And then Professor Lewis in the Wall Street Journal talked about the fact that it is Wright's first subdivision, and therefore this has some prefiguring of the Usonian houses, which had a lot to do with how suburban housing was designed. There's also a quote from our local critic, Blair Kamen, who said, why should you care? Because Wright was a genius. And further down, it's like even the modest cottage, a flat-roofed, one-story frame house, losing it would harm our ability to fully tell his story. In January 20th, 2020, the Park District agreed to sign a 99-year lease with the GHS to rent space in Park 7N for $1 per year, allowing GHS to move the cottage to the park related to the Ravine Bluff subdivision. The lease also required a $350,000 escrow account. Former village manager Paul Harlow graciously agreed to act as the independent escrow agent. The village offered between $14,000 and $20,000 of in-kind services. Other in-kind services were rendered for legal aid and architecture and construction work. A generous grant from the Seymour Persky Foundation of $200,000 allowed the Historical Society to begin the project. GHS ultimately raised $258,463 to complete the move, resiting the location of the house in the park because of necessary expensive water remediation. The point of this slide. This unforeseen work required another $75,000 from the already strained budget. The move finally took place on July 21st, 2020. It sounds so simple, but it came after long-term negotiations with the Frank Lloyd Wright Conservancy, the Village of Glencoe, and its Historic Preservation Commission, and the Park District, after all the fundraising and after intense negotiation with the home's owners, who agreed to donate the house to GHS in return for a hefty tax benefit. The Historical Society would like to thank Phil Corrali and Peter Van Vechten from the village, and Lisa Brooks and Lisa Shepard from the Park District, who expended great time and energy helping GHS save the cottage. Scott Javor and Ed Goodale will deal with that part of the story, but we have a final story to tell. You might have noticed that we are using the term Ravine Bluffs Cottage when previously we called it the Booth Cottage. Normally, homes that have been preserved are named after their first owners, which is how Booth Cottage got its first name. Sherman Booth was well known for his civic leadership, but in doing research for our national award-winning Glencoe's Black Heritage exhibit, still up at GHS today, you can go see it at least through the end of the year, we learned that Sherman Booth was also a leader in the discriminatory, racist actions of the 1920s when a group of Glencoe residents formed a syndicate that worked to push Black and Italian owners out of their homes. There was a sustained campaign to buy properties in order to demolish or rehab them for subsequent sale with restrictive covenants attached. We had not had that in Glencoe previously. Later, during Booth's tenure on the Park District Board, the Park District also purchased properties owned by Blacks and Italians and replaced their plots with parkland. They were not hiding their roles in this. The Society found ample public documentation of their actions. As a result, the Historical Society has opted to replace the Booth name with the same name the Park District bestowed on the park in which the building is located, Ravine Bluffs Cottage. And now, for the story of moving the building, we turn to Ed Gooddale.
I get to tell you what I consider the fun part. This will be talking about the demolition at the cottage and the subsequent move. So what's the first thing you do? Well, you demolish the additions that you want to see removed. And what we can see in this slide, if I can get it to focus right, is there was a wall here with windows above it. That wall was removed because we wanted to slice off the addition on the south end of the cottage, right where you see the pointer going. And the windows were saved, as Scott will talk to you about. Our contractor, who I will describe in a minute, cut the floor joists and basically severed the connection at the floor, supported the overhang that we wanted to maintain, the 5-foot overhang, and then also cut the joists for the roof structure. So at that point, that section was ready to be removed. He did the same thing in the back for the 2 bedroom additions, and he did the same thing in the front. And we'll also let you know that in fact we had to remove the chimney and the fireplace because the weight of that much masonry would have been a severe strain on the adjacent joists. So that was another thing that was removed, and we'll be replacing in some form in the future. Okay. Oh, wrong way. Yes. All right. So what do we show now? Well, we get to show some of the fun stuff. This is the removal of the porte cochere in the front, and I'll show you that's this little doohickey right there that we want to take down. So Mike has severed it. It's all propped up and it's all hooked up. The sound effect is boom. So that was the front that was removed. The next thing we go to is the addition that we talked about that I just showed the earlier slide. And this was a garage and a connection between the garage into the cottage. And that was removed. And following that, we moved around to the back because it gave us a path to get around the end of the cottage to the backyard. And what was removed was a 2-bedroom addition. And as I said, this was also severed at the roof line and at the floor joists. So that we've got basically a little independent carbuncle on the back of the house that was removed. So all the additions have been removed at this point. So what do? Well, we brought in a specialist. Wolf Building Movers came in and placed the house on steel beams, which you can see here, 50-foot long steel beams, basically that extended the entire length of the cottage. And then those were supported by timbers stacked, as you can see, back and forth to give something called cribbing. And on the cribbing was placed hydraulic jacks to lift up the steel beams and basically move the house up and then eventually off the foundation. And you can see here the Buckingham power drives, which in fact will come into play. 3 of those are placed underneath the cottage to make it move. Now, this is going to be a 30-second video of the move itself. And I can tell you, it didn't move in 30 seconds. Part of it was moved on Monday evening, and placed out so that it was ready to go on to Franklin. And then the rest of the move conducted, I think it was about an hour and a half the next day, on Tuesday, the 21st, when it moved down the street. And if you want to use the word pivot, that's what this structure is about to do. Thank you, Ellen, for that word. And there it goes. As I said, didn't move quite that fast. There are no rocket sleds underneath the structure here. I guess this is where I tell jokes and do a dance, but at any rate, you can see this shows, you'll see several views actually of this. This is from closer to Franklin when the house moved. And there it is parked, ready for the next morning. And look, here it comes. There were news helicopters overhead. There were several hundred people on the street. And you might feel that maybe when you look at this from different viewpoints, that we're just missing people. Well, don't worry. The house wasn't moving that fast. And you may see frequently here a guy that's crouched down in front and is holding his hands at his waist. He's actually got something that's about the size of a little video controller that is controlling these 3 Buckingham power drives. He could make the house tilt one way or the other, rise up, go up totally or down. He was doing everything he could to avoid any of the tree branches, but we did have to take some of them off, as you will see, of course, in the video here. Again, it's a little faster than reality. So we came down Franklin, turned the corner, backed a little further towards Green Bay, and then the house was pivoted again to get up onto the park. And the village was very good about having traffic pass, as you saw it on the right side there, driving down the sidewalk since we had the street blocked.
I know, but I can tell you're in every single. I like the trucks going down the sidewalk.
You can see that we raised the cottage. We had to move a little bit of the fence. So we've gotten to the end of that. So eventually, the cottage was brought in and again placed on cribbing on the timbers in a perfect location so that it could be slid to the west onto a new foundation that was to be created. So how do you create the foundation? First, you excavate. This is the excavation. And then you put in footings. Here are our spread footings. The next step, the foundation walls. This creates the crawl space that is underneath the cottage. And then finally, this is the crawl space created with the concrete floor, with the waterproofing around the edge. And then what do? Well, that one last move from its temporary staging position in the park onto the foundation. This is in real time. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'll take that back, Karen. I think we did boost this a little bit. So
That's your hand. That's a lot slow.
a lot of people that day also walking around very interested. So the house is on its spot. We had to get the candid shot here, or the posed shot, I should say. Mike Reed on the left is actually with us today. Mike, raise your hand. This is our contractor. Mike's son Hakeem is next to him, and then that guy on the right just kept showing up at the park. I don't understand it, but I also want to introduce Ron Sharable and his wife Jan, who are here from the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy. And this would not have happened without the Conservancy, and certainly not without Mike. And I guess with all of us, with the Park District, with the village, it truly did take a village. So we're ready for the restoration. There it sits on the foundation, ready to go, and Scott Javor will take that part.
Well, thank you, Ed. That's a tough act to follow, really. I'll be talking about the restoration of the exterior of the cottage. We provided architectural services pro bono for the project. It wasn't quite as exciting as this. It was a little more methodically done, but interesting and fun nonetheless. So I'm going to go backwards just for a second. So the reconstruction actually started with deconstruction. As Ed mentioned, we had to take off the garage and the connecting link, the porte cochere, and then the 2 bedrooms which were in the back of the house. It appeared as though some of the original windows and materials had been used to construct these additions, so any materials we thought could be reused in the restoration were salvaged and inventoried. We also had to deal with site preparation. As you've seen before, we inherited a lake, which is not an amenity in this case. There was a significant amount of water that stayed in place even well after rainstorms. So a portion of our lease with the Park District required that we do water mitigation in these areas. We also had soil borings done where we had originally intended to place the cottage, which was more, which was kind of right about here. And we ultimately had to move it down to where it currently exists because the soil was also not adequate for bearing, in addition to the water issues. And there's the sidewalk that was primarily underwater most of the time that we replaced as well. This is the house moving into place, as Ed mentioned. It does show the end of the house, which we had to restore, the kind of work we had to restore in the fascia and soffit. Now, this is kind of a nice example. Maybe it doesn't look real interesting, but it's replacing the siding. There are 3 different types of siding. You can see the newest is here. These are older, different graining. Hard to tell how much difference they are in age, but those are the sort of things that might salvaged, inventoried, and reused absolutely wherever possible. We renovated the soffit, which is the part underneath the overhang. The house has 3-foot overhangs on the sides, 5-foot overhangs on the ends. One of the good things we found, and in demolition during a renovation project, you don't find good things real often. But one is that the 5-foot overhang at the south end had been built around with the addition. So it was still there. So when the addition came off, the eave was, an overhang was still up there. This also shows the built-up fascia. This adds to the horizontality of the house, which was a significant item in Wright's designs. It also shows a downspout that the house had on Franklin. We eliminated those and ended up using rain chains. This photo clearly exemplifies the characteristics of Frank Lloyd Wright's Prairie School of Architecture. They include horizontality to unite the structure with the flat plains of the Midwest. The horizontality is reinforced with clapboard siding, a thickened base under the windows, banded windows, the overhangs, this built-up fascia, and a built-up skirt board around the bottom. That all adds to the horizontality of the house. I'm sure that Susan Solway and David Miller and Ron Chervil can give you about 40 more elements that relate to Wright's work, but those are the highlights. The windows are significant. The leaded glass banded windows dematerialize the light, similar to the effect of stained glass windows. They seamlessly integrate the interior and the exterior. The view of the park from the inside of the cottage is absolutely stunning. I'm most anxious for you to all see that once we can open the interior, because it's absolutely remarkable. And those who live in Frank Lloyd Wright houses or who have been in them before know what an incredibly positive effect that has on your experiencing the space. Salvaged windows were reused wherever possible. Phase 1 included a partial restoration of the windows. That's kind of dramatic. Basically, we made sure they'd stay shut. Phase 2 of the window restoration will be done in conjunction with the interior renovation. The goal will be able to make them operable, level, and regularize the reveals around each of the windows. This shows you the way the leaded glass windows dematerialize the light, and it actually shows you too the rain chain behind it. So it's kind of an interesting photograph. Okay, we restored the south end of the cottage. This is where the connecting link and garage were. This is the overhang that still existed underneath everything. This is the west side of the house. We added an ADA accessible entrance. And this is again where the bedrooms were, so all of this had to be patched and repaired. When Mike was pulling siding off in this area, he found what we think was the original siding of the house, and it happened to be the same color it still is. So that was kind of a nice surprise as well. The front entrance is interesting. We had to do historical research, which included looking at the one photograph we had of the house, and we could rebuild the porch. We knew what it looked like from that photo. So it's an interesting piece of the house. For one thing, it's very thin in section and is not level with the fascia that runs around the house. It also has a screen wall on the south, and it's wide open on the north with a cantilever. Nothing's holding this up, as you can see. Okay. The corner post has clapboard siding on it, and it's mitered on all four corners. If you think that's an easy task to do it perfectly, it's not. And Mike did all of that. It also has this screen that kind of dematerializes the light through. It integrates nature and the front entrance as well. Similar to the way the windows do that. I don't know what I'm doing wrong here. Oh. What's also interesting about this design element is it screens the view of the entrance from the south. Wright would often hide the entrance to his houses. He liked that. He liked you having to go on a little adventure to find out how to get into the building. So that does that from this direction. From the other direction, it actually kind of brings you into the house. So let me go back one more, this one. So Mike did a really scientific stress test on this roof because designing it structurally to stay up and meet code in this thin section was tricky. So what Mike did, being the fine father he is, he had his son Hakeem go up here and jump up and down. And it worked. It worked. No, we won't. So the next thing I'd like to talk about are the rain chains. And this is what we used in lieu of downspouts. And Wright used these on lots of his buildings. This is kind of an unusual drainage system. A lot of Wright houses don't have gutters, but they have what are called inlaid gutters that are built into the roof. This actually has the roof pitching in all different directions to holes, and then the water goes through the hole, and it went through the hole into a downspout, which was not really attractive. So these rain chains are wonderful because they actually turn the distribution of water into artwork. I mean, it's beautiful when it's raining and when it freezes too in the winter actually. But so they go through these holes in the roof, down the chain, whoosh, 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 into square splash blocks at the bottom, which Wright used as well, and then they go into the ground to an underground storm sewer that was part of our site work. Yes, and this shows the rain chain. Excuse me. We selected this because a lot of Wright's geometry is based on squares and rectangles. Well, what luck. We have squares, we have rectangles. They're square in plan, and they created exactly the effect we wanted. There we go. Yeah, it's really a great effect.
It brings the fall.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this shows the square splash block, and then you can go to the next one, please. And it also shows how there's shadows on the walls during when it's sunny. So even that adds some artistic interest to the house, and it moves around as shadows. When right sometimes there's cutouts in the roof, and the shadows move all over the house, and it's really effective. Next one, please. As I mentioned earlier, with the site restoration, we had to move the cottage from over here to where it is. Next one. And this whole area of grade was raised, reconfigured. The storm sewer goes under this area. There are 4 catch basins on the site. It was a significant amount of infrastructure work that we had to, as Peggy said, use a good piece of our budget for. It was about $75,000. We actually only rent the land around the cottage from the Park District, but this was just one of the conditions because it had to be fixed in conjunction with this. And it was a huge upgrade, of course, for the park. Next. That's just a close-up of it, but you can see instead of being a pond over here, it's all raised up and pitches correctly and works really well. Next. And we planted grass, and Park District put in some trees. Next. And so this is where we started, as you know. Next one. This is where we are, which is a pretty big step. And then Ed Ollinger is going to talk to you about where we are going. Like to go.
Okay. Since I don't possess any architectural or building skills, I was designated the committee's psychiatrist.
And that's true.
Okay. So it was always the intention of the Historical Society to, once the external appearance of the cottage was brought back to exactly as it was, or almost exactly as it was in 1913, to create a museum. And the subjects of the museum were going to be Frank Lloyd Wright and Glencoe, of course, and also the interesting subjects Elizabeth Booth and Sherman Booth. Now, Frank Lloyd Wright designed 22 structures in Glencoe, which is the 3rd most structures in the world in the city. Oak Park #1, Chicago #2, and Glencoe #3. He designed 22 structures. 13 were built. 14 were built, 13 were saved. We lost the public train station. That was demolished in the 1950s. Interestingly enough, Frank Lloyd Wright also designed, some of you may know, a town hall for Glencoe. And I guess we'd have to ask the village manager if it's too late to use his design. Elizabeth Booth was going to be the next subject. She was a key suffragette in getting the bill giving women the right to vote in a national election 6 years before it became a constitutional amendment. And here she is in Springfield, and the woman in circle is Elizabeth Booth, and the man sitting at the table, everyone knows who this is. Anyone know who the governor of Illinois was in 1913? Richard, that's right. It was Edward Dunn. And then Sherman Booth will be a subject for the museum. As was brought out, he's the personal attorney to Frank Lloyd Wright. He had developed the Ravine Bluffs estate with Frank Lloyd Wright, and we want to explore and replicate the parts of the museum now on Park Avenue, indicating his activities in unfortunately suppressing Black and Italian population in Glencoe. So the next steps really are to pay for the creation of the museum. we need to, and also to develop an endowment for its daily maintenance. We need to approach foundations for grants, major corporations which would have an interest in funding this, and also we would hope to attract a number of private donors to help us in this effort. We are having another tour of the Ravine Bluffs Cottage and Ravine Bluffs in October 20th. And if there's any interest, you can please sign up on our website for this. And that concludes really the main portion of the lecture. And we would like to open up for any questions from the audience. Okay. Thank you very much. So I think we'll all participate in the question and answer. Any questions? Yes.
I have a question, not really by the architecture. I was very impressed by the way the presentation was done. I wondered if somebody did that moving on their iPhone by instead of pressing photo, pressing video.
No, that was a professional photographer that we brought in. So, yeah, they did all the,
So it should have been.
Yes.
I don't have a question. I just want to thank you for putting this show together. I think this is really remarkable. Brings back a lot of memories to me. I think I was up here almost every day.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else, please? Yes.
What does dematerializing like?
Oh, it's like it's like in a church where the light comes through the window, but it's not crisp light. The colors move everywhere, and leaded glass windows do that as well. The patterns reflect and move.
Diffuses it.
Yeah, it diffuses it.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
But it doesn't break it into a ring.
No.
Okay. Yes.
What are the other Wright houses in Glencoe? I know there's one on Sheridan Road. But there are others besides the one?
Well, there's the Glasner House on Sheridan, and then
Right,
there's
that's the one.
right the Brigham House. Okay. Owners here. Okay.
They don't
Yeah.
live in it. 790 Sheridan.
Sure.
There's a block and a half north of the park.
Okay, no, I knew that, sure.
Okay.
So that's the only one besides the Ravine?
Those
Yeah,
two.
but 5 houses in Ravine Bluff.
You're right.
The Booth house is separate. That's the 6th house.
Right.
So 6, 7, 8. And then the structures that are the 3 entryways to Ravine Bluffs, big circles with the light, the urns and the light posts in them. And the bridge is a Frank Lloyd Wright structure. So when you say 3rd largest collection of structures, it includes all of that as well. You know, it doesn't have to be all houses.
And why were there not more Wright houses built in Glencoe during that era?
We kind of surmise that there were a number of things going on. 1915 to 18, the United States is looking into, we're going to get into a war, and there's a war in Europe. They may have been too avant-garde. I don't know. Glencoe may have been too far out at that point in time. Most of the northwest area of Glencoe is not very well settled in that period. But I couldn't answer. He advertised, he had the lots, he was ready to build the buildings, and nobody bid.
I mean, actually, two of the homes that were built on Ravine Bluffs were bought by his brother-in-law, okay, to help him financially before they were sold again.
Who did they buy the 15 acres from?
Oh, that's a good question.
know.
I'm not sure.
It wasn't Bezos.
The lady in the back has a question too.
Yes.
In Highland Park, and we grew across the street from his Ward Willits house, which was 1901.
Yeah.
So Glencoe wasn't too far out. And also there are 2 Frank Lloyd Wright houses on Lake Avenue in Highland Park. One was the Mary Adams house, 1910, and then one's on the Bluff. But you're right about, I've studied his house. How do you get into the house? My grandfather Robert Cypher built several houses
Oh,
in the North Shore. The best ones, I think, are here in Glencoe. And you had a prominent doorway as they walk in here. But I think Wright his geometry was overwhelming, so that you had to, especially the 2 houses on Lake Avenue, You have to kind of walk around to find the front entrance. But the one on Lake, overlooking the ravine is just stunning. The living room goes out to the porch and then it just floats into a ravine. But I don't think this was too far out when the Ward Willits house, which is iconic, and in every art book, 1901.
Okay.
Your grandfather was quite a talented artist.
Yes, he was great. I lived in one for 70 years. Thank you.
One of the houses that we mentioned, the Glassner house, also is over a ravine where you go. I'm sorry, we have to repeat the question. She was asking about why we couldn't get further, but the Glassner house also is built over a ravine, and the estate that Wright proposed for the booths was going to be over the ravine. That's the ravine that the bridge goes over. But when they pulled back on that, the house is just a little bit to the west of the ravine. So I mean, but the answer is we're not really sure why Wright, but Wright was not nearly as popular then as he is now. He goes through that whole thing, and it's his third wife who makes him famous again. It takes until he does the Guggenheim and Falling Water and places like that, which are way beyond our period. Am I right, Susan? You have to stand up and talk loudly into the microphone.
No. It's been a long time since I've thought about or worked on any of this material, but there were a couple of other designs. The Grace Fuller house in Glencoe.
Yes, which was not
We
built.
know if it was
We
ever
couldn't
built.
find it.
We never found.
We couldn't find it, but there's mention of it.
Yes.
And I thought there was one other, of course, the two railroad waiting stations. And you're right, the Millard House, I think, is the other house you're
Yes.
mentioning in Highland Park over the.
It's not the Millard, it's near the Millard house, but it's, there's one on Lake and Lake Avenue, Lake almost on Laurel, and then further south, which is the living room stretches out. It's across the street from a ravine, but your mind certainly carries that way. But those are the three, they're occupied. But the Willits house, I can't not think, my cousin and I, that my grandfather, Robert Seifert, built his house on Sheridan Road, less than a half a block away from the Ward Willits house. And he bought the property. So, I'm thinking, well, here's a good architect, although they differed in aesthetics. And he built his own home where I was a baby in, and my father was born, and just almost within a half a block down the street from there, because it was a tremendous anchor at the time. So I think he chose that consciously, the location, because of the Willits house. 9 years between 01 and 1910. The rest of it was woods.
Wright had also gone through a rather,
Stand up and go closer to the microphone.
Wright had also gone through a rather rocky period in his personal life for several years up until he was designing these houses for Ravine Bluffs. So that could have also made people stop and think about whether they wanted a house associated with him or not. And it took him a long time to come back to where he had been, and he ended with a bang though, so that was good. But that was a feature factor.
When was the Roby house built, do you know?
1907.
Was it 7 or 9? Yeah. Yeah, good.
And I have a question about the rain chains, which are just stunning. I've never seen them on any Frank Lloyd Wright house. Are they on any others? Where? What, name any famous ones?
Many. That doesn't help.
It's one in Indiana. I can't think of the name of it now.
Yeah, we looked at the examples of what the chains looked like too as we were searching for one to specify.
There used to be these bells by the guy who developed Solari. They remind me of that, even though they come from spells, not as rain chains. So they're really stunning, but I've never seen the page, and I've seen a lot of Wright houses.
Any other questions? Patrick?
We were talking about geography and, this perhaps being a bridge too far. The train shelter that Frank Lloyd Wright designed, was that meant to service the electric railroad?
Yes.
Or okay. So
He designed 2 actually for Ravine Bluffs.
Thank you.
One right at Maple Hill and then one at the end of Silver.
Questions? Anyone?
And they were torn down.
No,
One
one
was
was
not
not built.
built.
The one on Sylvan wasn't built.
Oh,
But that's
wasn't-
why there's a marker back there, one of the sculptural markers.
But
was
the other
built.
one, was it torn down? or-
Yes.
Yes.
Well, that was close to where the
Yeah, they
The
parallel.
cottage, yeah, was right just west of it, yeah.
There was something for a while, wasn't there, to rebuild?
Yeah.
There was,
Yeah.
there was.
In, for the centennial of Wright's work in Glencoe in 2015, yes, that was going to
We
be.
could never get that to fruition, but the funds that were in fact donated for that particular effort then ended up, with the donor's permission, ended up being applied to the work to save the cottage.
Any other questions? Well, on behalf of the Historical Society of Glencoe, thank you.